Hey, you're listening to 6 Minutes and 66 Seconds with me, your host, Michael Arnzen. Hey, welcome back, everybody, and I wanted to just start this episode by expressing my appreciation for all the kind words and even gifts that so many of you sent me in response to the last episode about the passing of my father. I really just feel lucky to have caring people in my life, in and out of family, so thank you. And if you donated to stroke.org, I thank you on behalf of my dad. This episode, I promised I would get back to listener questions, but first I just want to encourage you to send me a question if you'd like me to talk about anything at length here, at least for 6 minutes and 66 seconds or less. This first question comes from William Hamilton, my old friend from graduate school, who wrote me on Instagram. And if you don't know my Instagram, it's at Mike Arnzen. He asks, how do you get protein stains out of a clown outfit? Just asking for a friend. Well, all right, Bill. The obvious answer is seltzer water. Spray it right into the fabric as violently as possible. Hopefully, you can lace that seltzer water with something, let's just say, a little acidic. Use any leftover water in your spritz flour gizmo. And spray people in the face, mostly children, as often as possible with it. Okay, get back to clowning, Bill. But later on, he also asked me in response to a previous episode 6, I think, what is a current electronic zine that you think is worth checking out? And I've got some answers to this question. But first I wanted to say that after I published that episode where I talked about the zine scene, the underground magazine scene in the 1990s, I don't think I named the title for any of those magazines. So I went online to see if I could find them, and realized there's a whole list of ones that I contributed to on a website called zinewiki.com. If you go there, you can look for my name or you can just surf around. Some of those are still publishing, a scant few. The list of titles of magazines from those days on that Zine Wiki page are kind of crazy. They even read like a horror poem. You've got titles like Gru and Frisson and The Iguana Informer, Insolent Rudder, Midnight Zoo, and crazy ones like Mind Rot and The Obligatory Sin, which was one of the first places I published. There are even some magazine titles that aren't on a list, and one that comes straight to mind for me is my favorite title of all time. Some of you have heard me say this before. It was an underground punkish horror zine called Festering Brain Sore. And in the first issue that I appeared in, I believe I wrote a review of John Waters' Pink Flamingos. There were also some semi-professional, small press horror magazines that aren't in the list that I've always wanted to appear in, and I tried to, believe me, when I was getting started. One was called The Horror Show, which I was an avid fan of, and the editor was a great writer, the late David Silva. I'd recommend that to anybody, his work to anybody. There was also a magazine edited by Chris Locker called New Blood, and I ate that magazine up. It really captured the darkness of horror for me, the grit of it, but also, he published new writers, the ones that were worth paying attention to. And that's what those magazines were really like. So Bill asked me, is there a zine that you would recommend for these days? I would say check out Cemetery Dance. It began as a semi-professional zine back then and has grown into becoming a full-fledged publisher, while still retaining its horror zine of the 90s feel to a certain degree. Still fiction-centered. They don't really publish poetry, which I've always found unfortunate, but Cemetery Dance is the king right now of horror publishing. They don't come out very often. They don't accept a lot of new things anymore, but it's a great magazine. Then maybe try your local newsstand for other emergent mags that aren't necessarily underground zines as much as contemporary journalism related to horror. Unfortunately, in the horror genre, they mostly focus on film, but that isn't universally the case, and it's not really a big problem since most of these magazines acknowledge that the genre is a wide tent and incorporates all media forms, from games to hardcover books to comics. So, in that regard, I would recommend Rue Morgue out of Canada. It's the top dog in that area. What else can I recommend? Well, there are some publishers who release zines nowadays electronically, but they're almost always throwbacks or fun side projects. And it's actually more common for publishers to release theme anthologies, which feel a lot like those zines back then because they attract, new, hungry short story writers to submit original work and to kind of make their bones. So seek out the publishers who do that. There are many. One would be Mike Bailey's Written Backwards, Max Booth III's Ghoulish Books. I love weird punk books. I love shortwave publishing. They do no wrong. Also, my all-time favorites, Eraserhead Books, which is on the more bizarro side of the spectrum, along with my long-standing publisher, Raw Dog Screaming Press. They knock it out of the park every time. Once you start following your favorite writers in these presses, especially the fringier ones, you'll start to learn more about the horror community, and that's really what it's all about. You'll be set. So, yeah, and if you're just looking for the next great thing, I highly recommend seeking out the Bram Stoker Award Ballot every year, issued annually by the HWA. Look for bramstokerawards.horror.org online. This week's episode is brought to you by Soylent Pudding. Soylent Pudding, putting the organs into organic since 1975. Soylent Pudding is fecal.